have the honor to seek our plenary speakers. It's his fifth contribution to the Global Conference on Business and Social Sciences, and we always glad to have him, Dr. Gabriël Moens from Curtin University in Australia. He's a law professor and director of research in the Curtin Law School. He's also emeritus professor of law at the University of Queensland. And prior to his current position, he served as a Pro Vice Chancellor in Law, Business and Information Technology. And he was also for many years Dean and Professor of Law at the University of Murdoch in Australia. And today he's going to talk about the knowledge revolution, challenges and opportunities.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Dr. Kassan, distinguished keynote speakers, ladies and gentlemen. I have participated in the Global Conference on Business and Social Sciences on a number of occasions, and I'm always struck by the amount of knowledge that is transmitted during the conference. Of course, I should not be surprised at all. After all, we are researchers, and a researcher is a person whose job it is to transmit knowledge, and indeed to transmit knowledge in an imaginative way. The word imaginative very much refers to the expectation that whenever we transmit knowledge, we will consider existing knowledge, we will reflect upon it, we will assess and evaluate current knowledge in order to seek new understandings which will eventually enhance and extend our knowledge. It is fair to say that nowadays we are in the midst of a knowledge revolution. And in the limited amount of time which is available to me, I would like to make a few remarks about the knowledge revolution, concentrating on a few challenges and opportunities. And as a theme, I would like to say that there are limits to the knowledge revolution. The revolution, in my opinion, should be tempered by wisdom or common sense or faith, if you like. In order to start my contribution today, I would like to put the knowledge revolution in perspective. To my mind, there have been three major revolutions in the world. For many tens of thousands of years, people led a nomadic life. They were foraging for food for their families and their tribes. But about 10,000 years ago, people started to settle and to cultivate the land. That is when the agricultural revolution took place. In the 18th century, and that is not very long ago, mankind experienced an industrial revolution, whereby it became possible to produce and manufacture goods mechanically and more effectively than ever before, thereby increasing the amount of goods which were available to mankind. And now we are in the midst of a new revolution, which I refer to as the knowledge revolution. And this is very special because throughout the centuries there was always a scarcity of knowledge. And in the past, those who had knowledge of any kind were those who were powerful. But nowadays we can all be powerful because we have access to information, knowledge, if you like, which is readily available. In fact, we are only ever going to be limited by our own imagination and technology and digital developments, which are increasing by the day. The knowledge revolution very much involves the transmission of an overload of information. Knowledge these days can easily and instantaneously be obtained from a great variety of sources, including, of course, television, the internet, email, smartphones, and so on. According to Rifkin, who published an interesting book entitled The Age of Access, wealth in the form of physical assets will diminish consistently and repeatedly, while wealth in the form of knowledge will increase. Those of us who want to be powerful will need to have access to ideas, concepts, information, and that is indeed what is happening in the revolution that I'm talking about. Thomas A. Stewart pointed out, of course, that the agricultural and also the industrial revolution are still with us, even though we are in the midst of the knowledge revolution. Because obviously we all need to eat from time to time, and therefore there will always be a need for agriculture. There will also be a need for goods, and therefore the industrial revolution will still be with us, whether we like it or not. But the emphasis these days is on the knowledge revolution, on the transmission of concepts, ideas, information. And I think there are so many examples that we could possibly give. I can still be here 12 hours from now and give you examples until we are all blue in the face, but unfortunately I'm not going to do that. But I will give you just a few examples. And I would like to say, though, that many of the examples that I'm going to give actually adversely impact privacy. Privacy, which after all, in many of our countries is a constitutional right, or at least a right which is safeguarded by legislation. So I'm already flagging that there is a conflict between the right to privacy and many of the developments that have taken place and are part of the knowledge revolution. Of course, in this context, I'm talking about tracking devices, GPS-controlled appliances. It is possible for governments, for those who want to know where you are at the moment, to know what is being discussed by me and everybody else in the room. Many countries, including Australia, have adopted metadata legislation. Metadata legislation imposes an obligation upon service providers, like for example a telephone company or an internet company, to keep records, all records of transmissions of information that have been conducted during the last 2 or 3 years. Whilst the legislator does not want to know anything at all about the content of the messages, the legislator nevertheless will know when the message has been sent, by whom it has been sent, who the recipient is, and the time it has been sent. That is the metadata legislation, which we have in Australia and in a number of other countries, ostensibly to combat terrorism. As a lawyer, I can tell you that many of the employment laws and structures, including contract law, are no longer terribly relevant today because we have new structures, new arrangements, legal arrangements, which have developed as a consequence of the knowledge revolution. And I'm talking about ride sharing, the Uber experience, homestay accommodation, and so on. We have driverless cars in the not too distant future, blockchain technology, and there are so many other technical, technological and digital developments that we could possibly come up with. Now, I would like to point out rather strongly that in the knowledge revolution age in which we are now, data are very important. Data have never been more valuable, nor opportunities for innovation so great. Those who possess data, information, are those who are likely to be very powerful in society. However, we know that whenever there are data, there are going to be data breaches. I would like to point out that the opportunities created by the possession of data, that this opportunity will collide with risks, major risk, a risk of data breaches, as we have seen during the last decade in a number of countries. And the data breaches inevitably and typically will reveal a conflict between the right to know on the one hand and the need for national security. And in this context, we have to ask the question, is it possible to resolve this conflict? Is it possible to reconcile these divergent aims and goals and objectives of those who want to secure our future and those who want to know more about what goes on in the world? It's a question that I'm not going to answer today because it would obviously lead me too far. But I am flagging this conflict because it is at the heart of what I'm discussing today. The knowledge revolution, in my view, also has major consequences for the way in which companies and organizations manage their data. Typically, though not necessarily always, companies do not manage their data well because they are not used to manage their data. They are used to manage other assets, like buildings, for example, their IP rights. But data typically are not very well managed by companies, and therefore they fail to exploit the benefits that are associated with the possession of data. So that is why I'm suggesting that directors of companies need to engage more on the governance of data. Because if a company misunderstands the value of data they possess, businesses will ignore opportunities which otherwise would come their way, and therefore they will fail to adequately protect data. Companies typically do not protect their data well because data are intangible, and the intangibility of data assets causes businesses to fail to account for their value. In this context, I would like to say that managers of companies and directors must give more power to a knowledge worker, those who actually know what goes on, those who actually know how the data are to be used. So more power should be given to knowledge workers to contribute and make decisions which are of great value to the relevant company. We are used these days to use devices of all sorts, We really don't know grammar anymore because we can easily check it on a device. We don't need to do calculations anymore because there are sophisticated calculators. Basically, we don't have to do anything at all that we used to do, say, until about 20 years ago. Now, this is a major development and a dangerous development because this digital revolution, the knowledge revolution, may well lead to, and in fact has already led to, a lowering of educational standards in many developed and developing countries, including an inability on the part of people to be able to read and to comprehend. Grammar these days, and I'm talking about some of my own students, some of my own students don't know grammatical rules anymore. They don't understand the rules of punctuation. They have lost many of the skills which we took for granted until about 20 years ago, and this is because of the knowledge revolution and the digital developments that I'm talking about. So that's a major danger. But the most important thing that worries me is that some of us in society totally and blindly rely on scientific and technological developments. There is an expectation that science and scientific developments will cure all the ills of mankind in the future, if only we are on top of the scientific developments. In other words, there is that belief that there is no room anymore for common sense, wisdom, faith, if you like it, that science will cure all the ills of society. And that worries me greatly, because science will indeed solve many of our problems in the future, but in solving many problems, more problems will be created and more mysteries will occur, which therefore will need to be addressed. by common sense, by wisdom, by faith, not necessarily by science. So there is, I think, a mistaken assumption these days that all problems can be solved by scientific developments. You know, you may be an expert at science. You may be an expert at solving, complex calculations. But it is fair to say that the more you know about a particular topic or issue, the more you actually realize that you know very little indeed. And that's, by the way, that is my definition of an expert. An expert is actually a person who realizes that he or she knows very little and therefore has still a lot to learn. That is a person who very well knows that even during the knowledge revolution there is always going to be room for common sense, for wisdom and faith, and that science is not necessarily going to cure all the problems of mankind in the future. Another challenge associated with the knowledge revolution, of course, and I have alluded to that already before, are the invasions of privacy. And privacy, as I mentioned, may well be a constitutional and or a right protected by the legislator. Now, in Australia, they now want to extend the metadata legislation so that it can also be used in civil litigation, thereby further infringing the rights of privacy of people in society. So it's no longer going to be used for terrorism, but it is going to be used for civil litigation as well. And therefore privacy is a right which is only going to exist in name and not necessarily in reality. I think as a society we need to do something about reasserting our rights to privacy and a space that belongs to us and nobody else. Basically, what I'm asking all of us to do is to recognize the limits of the knowledge revolution. There are limits and there should be limits. For reasons which I have already mentioned, because the knowledge revolution is not going to cure all the defects that exist in society. There are limits to the knowledge revolution. There is going to be scope for wisdom, for common sense and faith. And I became aware of that rather a long time ago. When you are a parent, you obviously encourage your children to learn, to obtain knowledge, to do well in school, to learn as much as possible. Now, I have a daughter, or I had a daughter, when she was 11 years old, she told me, "Dad, I already know far too much." So there was my daughter, 11 years of age, who told me that she already knew far too much. That struck me as totally bizarre, but later on, it led me to think about the limitations of the knowledge revolution, of which we are all a part. So my message today has been that in the future, if not now, it is necessary to temper the knowledge revolution by wisdom, common sense and faith. Actually, a point that has already been made by Jack Ma, who is the founder of Alibaba. But if we do temper the knowledge revolution by faith, by common sense, by wisdom, we will actually acknowledge the limitations of the knowledge revolution. That being said, I'm excited about the knowledge revolution because it does create so many opportunities that clearly did not exist in the past before. The most important benefit of the knowledge revolution is that it enables all of us to rise above our status and to become something better than we are at the moment. In this context, and this will be my last remark, in this context I like to refer to a play which was written in the 1940s by an American, Garson Kanin, Born Yesterday, was made into a film by George Cukor in 1950. That movie is about a female protagonist who was told in the movie that knowledge, in this case knowledge of etiquette, knowledge of the way in which people behave in high society, knowledge enables people to fit in the society in which they happen to be. Knowledge encourages people to actually transcend their own situation and not being constrained by their station in life, as Plato argued in some of his contributions to philosophy. That is the most important benefit, I think, of the knowledge revolution, that it enables all of us to rise to a higher level than the level we are operating at the moment, as long as we are aware that there are limits to the knowledge revolution, and the limits are dictated by a need to be aware of wisdom, faith, and common sense. Thank you very much indeed.